Hi friends, welcome to Eyes of My Heart with Vicki Jean. Just check this here. Okay. It is Christmas Eve morning and I'm waiting to go to church. We are having our Christmas Eve service that we would usually have on Christmas Eve evening this morning at church. And Mark is going to be singing and I'm just looking forward to that. But with that, I also have a confession. Christmas is not my favorite time of year. I usually cannot wait to get through the Christmas season, and I'm sorry if that makes me a Grinch, but it's just how it is, and it's just a personal thing. I don't even really know why. I think some of it has to do with just the consumerism that I see is even more rampant, the sometimes the greed that just you're bombarded with, the people like give me, give me, give me, and materialism. It's just like everything is more in your face. However, I do want to acknowledge that one of the beautiful things that does happen at Christmas time in most communities is this idea of an organization, usually oftentimes getting together and organizing things like Toys for Tots, or communities or even small groups that just get together and do something kind like serving a meal to the homeless and going to nursing homes and singing Christmas carols. I love that. I truly do. It brings something beautiful out. But personally, I think those are things that should be done all year round. And we live in a culture that is very blessed economically. Yeah, we have our problems. There is no doubt about that. And we still have poverty in our country, I know. But for the most part, we have a government that provides in many ways for those who don't have anything, as compared to those in third world countries who just starve to death or are facing war and don't have any place of safety to go to. So I do think of those things too, and I'm thankful to live in America with all of its beauty, with all of its resources, and with all of its problems and all of its heartache and the things that happen politically that we're bombarded with. I don't want to focus on that. I am truly aware of it and I acknowledge it and I have my opinions about it. But we live in a country where we have so much, and yet we also live in a country where we tend to be so driven to get more. So I'm just thinking about these things today, and maybe Christmas makes me think about it more. I don't know. But I also today am thinking about some friends who have lost family members this year. Or I have a friend right now who could very easily lose her spouse in the next day or two. We don't know. And I think obviously it just makes things more difficult during the Christmas season when everything is supposed to be so light and exciting and magical. And then those who even have lost loved ones from years gone by. And Christmas is a reminder of their absence. And I think of my dad. He died 10 years ago. And after his death, our Christmases changed. And we began to celebrate more. The kids were scattered out amongst or around the country. And after my dad passed away, we stopped gathering so much at the central location in Indianapolis. And, begin to just do our own thing. So there's just a lot of reasons, I guess, that Christmas isn't my favorite time of year. Now, obviously, I love the tradition that it started with the birth of Christ, our hope, our joy, and I love the opportunities to remember that, perhaps in special ways. But even that, unfortunately, that story can become tweaked and commercialized and I don't know, just forgetting, what it was truly all about. So on that cheery note, sorry, I just want to be honest. This isn't my favorite time of year. But you know what? I am grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to be doing this little video. I don't know, I never know if people hear this or watch it or not, but it's therapeutic for my soul. It's like my journaling. They call them a vlog, I guess, instead of a blog. And so I'm up here in my little office with my coffee. It's actually foggy and kind of rainy outside, but I'm looking forward to going to church. I have some music playing. I don't know if you can hear it. Just some meditation music. But I want to read something today from an author by the name of Paula D'Arcy. And she has a tragic story that happened when she was a young married mom. And it turned the course of her life. She was in her late 20s, and she had a 5-year-old daughter, and she was pregnant with her second child. And she and her husband were in their car traveling, and a drunk driver hit them head on. And her husband and her child were killed. Her 5-year-old child were killed. But she survived, and her unborn child survived and later was born. And she has written a couple, well, actually more than a couple, a few books that kind of grew out of her healing during that time and how it changed her. And it's a beautiful story. And she went on to be not only an author and a speaker, but she also worked as a counselor. She worked with Norman Vincent Peale for a while. She's just a beautiful, beautiful soul. And I've seen her in person a few times and talked with her and been part of virtual conferences as well that she has done. So I wanted to share some words from her today. And she also was a friend of Morrie Schwartz. And I don't know if that name rings a bell, but he was the gentleman in the book Tuesdays with Morrie. And she knew him personally and visited with him frequently during that time of his life as he was dying. But I want to share some words today that I hope encourage you. And I share this because sometimes at Christmas time, we do focus on the losses of our life, especially if they were loved ones that aren't here, or even the loss of certain traditions. I talked about how we used to always meet. At my sister's house, I have to take these off when I'm talking because the light just glares right in them. And we don't have the same traditions. And so the ability to let go of a tradition with grace and with gratitude and to not let that become, something that I continue to try to cling to, this idea of accepting and receiving the gifts of life, when Christmas certainly is that time of remembering gifts, but also a time of releasing and recognizing the things that are no longer present. And what does that mean for my life right now? Do I cling to the past, or do I become fully present to the moment and the new birth that this season of life can offer me, even as I hold the losses? And sometimes those losses are just a loss of a dream. I remember when I went through my divorce and I had a few Christmases where I was alone. And fortunately, it was the time when we were still meeting in Indianapolis. But you can be surrounded by people in times of joy and be very aware of this sense of being a solitary, aloneness. And I can remember wondering, is this how it will be the rest of my life? And having to grapple with that and say, yeah, it might be. And if it is, I have to make it the best of my life. I have to live at my fullest self, whether I'm single or married or widowed or divorced or whatever it might be. All right, I'm just going to read this. And I'm just going to pick up. I know I'm picking up in the middle of a chapter, but I hope I'm only going to read a couple paragraphs, and hopefully you'll see where she's going with this. Healing has so many layers, and old habits are relentless. The force of one's culture is relentless. But all that was an excuse. I followed the advice I often gave others and got to work. She's talking about this healing. She was a counselor and she was helping others heal. But she also was becoming very aware of that there was still this lack in her own healing because it's a process. She said, however well I understood that the roles I play are not who I am, that I am the self, I am the soul experiencing those roles, this was still apparently something I needed to learn at deepening levels. And isn't that true? We can grasp something and it takes hold in our soul and we think, I got it. And then suddenly we realize it's the tip of the truth, the tip of the iceberg, and we've got to go deeper. She said, I began with questions. Which activities in my life were taking up more time than they were worth? Let's just stop and think about that. What activities in my life are taking up more time than they are worth? And we each will probably answer that very differently. But I pray that we will answer it honestly, because the more honest we are at getting to that truth, the more fully we can be born anew into this moment, into this stage of life. Which relationships nourished me? That's another one. And sometimes it's the surprising ones. When I asked myself that question, of course there are people dear and near to me, but when I really sat with it, there are some people who nourish me, who I don't know yet. I've only encountered them briefly, maybe an acquaintance, maybe a 30-minute conversation, but I left them going, I want them to be a part of my life. I want to put forth the effort to create a relationship, a friendship with them, but then I don't do it. Which relationships nourish you, or do you believe could nourish you if you put forth an effort to build them, to take the risk? And then ask yourself which relationships didn't nourish me or don't nourish me. Where should I invest more of my time? That was another good question for me, because when Mark retired, I cut way back on my counseling practice, and I suddenly found myself with more time and wasn't really using it all that wisely. And I began to feel kind of drained and kind of empty and kind of purposeless. And where should I invest more of my time? But it took effort, because all of my time before was, I knew who I was. I worked in neuropsychology. I worked as a counselor. That is where my time was, seeing clients, doing reports. And it was changing. Where are you at in your life right now? Where should or do you desire to invest more of your time? And maybe it's in something as simple as learning to play an instrument. Or maybe it is going out and taking a risk to do or to be something else, as far as a job or a career or a volunteer. Maybe it's again, finding a hobby, whatever it is, think about that question. And then the question is, how much time did I still spend trying to please everyone? So she's asking herself these questions. And so if I ask myself that, it's how much time do I still spend trying to please everyone? That's a good question. Because I never thought of myself, especially in recent years, as a people pleaser. But it's still there. Even when I decided to do these videos, especially when I would talk about my faith, because that has been like I said, kind of a renovation that's been taking place that has caused me to step into the mystery of God's love in a new way. And I knew that some of my experiences and some of the things that I shared were not going to ring true with the evangelical, fundamental Christian path that I grew up in. I haven't forsaken that path. I haven't forsaken Christ. But I knew people were going to tell me that I was, that don't listen to her, that's a false teaching, that's heretical. And so I began to think, well, how can I say things in a way that will make them happy? And boy, oh boy, did that create conflict in my soul. And it was as though the Spirit of love, the Holy Spirit just said, Vicki, who are you listening to? And I knew I was listening to that voice of fear. I don't want people to be upset with me. I don't want to hurt my family or my friends who have always seen me in this certain role as a biblical teacher or a person who is very devout because it looks just like them. That's people pleasing too. And I've seen it in the church growing up, even with pastors. I've been a chaplain to pastoral staff, and I see that same inner struggle. That pastors who are going deep into this mystery of God now have to please a hierarchy that, to be honest, kind of constrains them. And they have to please the parishioners that if they don't say the right thing or do the right thing, will be judged. How do you live as your truest self, being a people pleaser? It takes courage. It takes a lot of courage. But you know what? We are told, be strong, be courageous, do the work that God has created you and called you to do, and you will find a freedom unlike anything you've ever known. You will know love. You will know the truest God-created self that has nothing to do with a label or a title or an assumption of what people think you should be. Friends, there's nothing like stepping into the mystery of God's love. And then she said, how often am I silent and listening? Listening and discerning. So I'm going to read those questions one more time. Which activities in your life are taking up more time than they are worth? Which relationships nourished you and are nourishing you? Which ones don't? Where should you invest more of your time? How much time do you still spend trying to please everyone? How often are you silent and listening? Then she goes on and says, I knew I had choices about whether or not to live in the world differently. But would I actually change? Change didn't require a degree in theology. All the concepts in the world would not benefit me. I needed the discipline required to make the inner journey as the primary journey. I turned a new page in my journal and I wrote, God is not an idea. I let those words confront me. God is a reality, a real power. And I exist because of that power, but I have to be willing to know it. And she's talking about knowing it with the fullness of her spirit in her heart, not just in her head. And we have to be willing. And if we're willing to know it, we have to let go of what we think we know now. And then she says, just a belief in God would not take me far enough, deep enough. I wanted to live increasingly aware of the hidden force of God. Then it became clear. The access point I sought was the present moment. If I were always living in my mind, always rushing, always doing, then I would consistently miss the subtle movement of spirit. I needed the spaces in between my actions to enlarge. I needed pauses. How many pauses do you have in your life? My ear had to be bent to a different ground, the ground of silence. We tend to pride ourselves on how busy we are, and that is ego-driven. When people say, oh, how are you? And we're like, oh, I'm so busy. We can carve out time. And believe me, we think that we can't. But we can make time for more pauses. And it might mean putting our phones away, not even carrying them with us. That's a little scary, isn't it? We can do those things. So those are just some of the thoughts that I wanted to share today on this Christmas Eve. I want to read this last one again. Then it became clear the access point I sought was the present moment. Right here, right now. If I were always living in my mind, always rushing, always doing, then I would consistently miss the subtle movement of the Spirit. And I know there are people whose lives require them to be active. If you have a job and a family and children and kids in school, you're busy. But even some of that busyness is a choice. And I'm not ever telling you what choices to make, but when you reflect and say, where can I create more pause? Do my kids have to be in everything? Do I have to be in everything, on every committee, volunteering for everything? Where can I pause? And I have to ask myself that too, because I get stuck living in my mind. And then when we're living in our mind, always thinking about the could-haves, the should-haves, or the what-ifs, we're also not in the present moment. So sometimes the pause has to take place in our mind and in our heart. That be still. Okay. I have gone way longer than I anticipated. So, hey, if you have hung with me this far, God bless you. But I love Paula D'Arcy. I love her words of wisdom. And excuse me, what I read came from this book called Sacred Thresholds. Crossing the inner barrier to deeper love. And you know that I'm on a love kick. I have said that for the last couple weeks, and I'm actually making a playlist on my YouTube video for this idea of love. Because it is the key. And that is love with a capital L that awakens us, encompasses us, holds us, purifies us, changes the way we see everything. Merry Christmas. And if you're watching this and it's not even near Christmas, God bless you. Be present. Go deep. Don't ever settle for anything less than the fullness and the mystery of God in your life. Take care.